Welcome to the Bernadette Jackson Podcast, where we are redefining how the world views women with daddy issues by discussing topics, sharing stories, and gaining insight, all from the perspective of a fatherless daughter. I'm your host, Bernadette of BernadetteJackson.com. Today I'm going to start a series called Fatherless Daughter Trigger Points. This is a term I coined to describe the ways fatherless daughters cope, whether consciously or unconsciously, with their father loss. Over the next several episodes, I will focus on 2 to 3 fatherless daughter trigger points, or FDTPs. Let's kick this off with 3 popular ones. But first, let me tell you a story. In my early 20s, I met this man. He was a lot older, and to be honest, I was scared that he would find me immature and that we wouldn't have anything in common. I remember thinking he was so smart. He spoke about his businesses and the vision that he had for them and his life, and I was truly inspired. I told him that I loved the culture of nonprofits and that I wanted to start one someday. He lit up, and he told me that he wanted to start a nonprofit too. So our connection grew from there. We discussed everything. We would spend hours a day just talking, sharing the same faith, and surprisingly, having a lot of similar interests and experiences growing up really brought us closer together. Even with all of that, I still felt that eventually he would realize that I wasn't worth his time. I didn't have anything to offer him except my youth and enthusiasm. He would ask me to help him with projects that he was working on in his business, and I happily agreed. The more I did for him, the more I wanted to do. See, in my mind, I felt that if I proved useful and he grew to need me, I would be worthy of his love. I grew to love him so much that I couldn't conceive of one thing that he could ask me to do that I would deny him. Our relationship was equal parts exhilarating and abusive. In hindsight, the way he treated me and what he expected from me was all in an effort to control and isolate me. But I only saw the investments that he made into developing me in areas that he thought that I needed to improve. Today, I would call what he was doing grooming me. But I didn't really notice at the time that the relationship was as abusive as it was, because abusive relationships was all that I was used to. And I'll tell you what, the grooming really worked, because I was hooked. We would work together, play together, argue terribly, and I wouldn't back down. Later, he would remark that he loved my fire, and that, of course, made me feel so much pride. Eventually, after finally realizing what had been happening over a year, and for the first time seeing how far away from who I was I had strayed to please him, I found the strength to leave the relationship. It was one of the hardest things I ever did, because I didn't know who I was anymore. I had isolated myself from family and friends. I didn't have any money of my own and no resources outside of him. The time after the end of that relationship was a true low point for me that I had to fight hard to dig myself out of. I learned valuable lessons about myself and what I was willing to do to prove my worth in relationships. And to be honest, it really scared me. I know now that my father loss made me believe that I wasn't worth much, and I feared being abandoned by a man that I loved so much that I routinely overextended myself in that relationship to someone who expected it but didn't appreciate it, and it was always met with no reciprocity. I vowed that I would never allow myself to behave that way in relationships again. I told you this story because it highlights 3 of the fatherless daughter trigger points that I want to discuss today. Fear of abandonment is a fatherless daughter trigger point, or FDTP for short, that is extremely common. Because of the nature of why our father wasn't there, we often assume that every relationship we enter into will end with that person leaving us. This fear, whether we know it or not, is the lens we filter our responses in conflict, criticism, dialogue, and most any interaction through. Fear of abandonment is the reason that being open about our needs and desires is so hard. It's the reason you find vulnerability a concept that you can't quite grasp and don't know if you even want to master. Fear of abandonment is the baseline for every emotion we have in relationships with others, and if left unchecked, it will cause you to remain in a cycle of unfulfilled relationships. Another trigger point associated with father loss is the desire to prove you're worthy of love. I surveyed over 300 women and found that although the reason they were fatherless varied, more than half of them struggled with feelings of unworthiness. This is because fatherless daughters don't often feel chosen. We want to be loved, seen, understood, and supported, but we fear that if we open up and are vulnerable, we could be hurt. It's a catch-22, really. Everything we desire in relationships is on the other side of us doing the things that we've avoided in order to protect ourselves. And the third fatherless daughter trigger point that I want to talk about is closely related to our desire to prove our worth. And it is that we often overextend ourselves to unappreciative people. Because we often feel unworthy, we believe that we need to bend over backwards to get people to see our worth. We don't realize that much of the time our loved ones already know how special we are. It's us that needs to catch up to what they already know. And if we hold on to the feeling that we are special and that the people who love us the most know this, it will help us to really reinforce not putting ourselves in relationships with others who don't see our worth and don't see how special we are. But we often position ourselves to be resources to these same people and create a culture where we are always needed. We happily oblige these people with any request that they ask, never asking for what we need in return. This goes on until we reach a point where we have nothing left. And still, many of us will not speak up about what we need in the moment. This is especially true in relationships where our partners don't think that we need anything from them because we have not told them. They just assume that we're okay. And it's only fair for me to mention that if we have not voiced what we need and what we want in relationships, how can we really expect our partners to know? Of course, we would love for them to read our minds, but we know that that's not realistic. So I just wanted to let you guys know that these 3 trigger points combined often keep fatherless daughters in the wrong relationships for too long, just going around in circles of unfulfillment. I don't want that for you. I want you to feel seen, heard, loved, and supported in all of your relationships. If you can relate to any of what we discussed today, I'd love to hear from you. You can reach me on my contact page at BernadetteJackson.com. That's BernadetteJackson.com. Next week, we'll be continuing this series where I'll bring you 3 more fatherless daughter trigger points. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.